Hi everyone, my name's Declan McLean. Welcome to Friday Forum Live, Point Blank's weekly broadcast bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday live from East London. Today we're joined by Point Blank instructor Chris Carter to take a deeper look at creative sound design using granular synthesis. So today is all about granular synthesis, and remember, these sound design techniques are just some of what's taught in depth in our sound design module, which is part of our wider diploma courses, so make sure you check them out. You'll also learn about creating your own sounds, synths, and much more. For more info on this and our diploma courses, make sure you check out pointblanklondon.com. And remember, we are, of course, as always, completely live. So get your questions in the chat and we'll get to them throughout the broadcast. Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
Very well, thanks.
It's Friday, feeling good?
It is, yeah, nice to be here.
So the best thing to do, as my mother always says, to do on a Friday is talk about granular synths.
Absolutely, every Friday.
Every single
Without
Friday.
fail,
Yes.
yeah.
So before anyone who doesn't know, before we dive into all the fun stuff, I mean, this is fun too. What is granular synthesis?
A granular synthesis is a type, it's kind of something in between sampling and synthesis.
Okay.
It's synthesis, but using audio. And we chop audio up into tiny little slices.
Right.
These are called grains.
Mm-hmm.
And the grains can be different sizes, and then the grains can be replayed and shuffled and looped and kind of mangled and so on.
Right.
So the name granular just it comes from this idea of grains, little tiny grains of audio that are just a few milliseconds long that we manipulate in various different ways.
So is it kind of like sample points being resynthesized?
That's one of the things,
right, okay.
yeah, exactly. And the audio can be analysed in different ways using different algorithms, and lots of different instruments kind of implement this idea in different ways. What we're doing is really just an introduction to the idea of it. So we're doing a kind of granular synthesis, but we're actually going to be doing it using flex time.
Right.
And flex time is really designed as a time stretch function. Yeah. And that's how time stretching works. It takes the audio, pulls it apart or squashes it together by, when you stretch stuff, you loop little bits.
You're basically filling in the gaps.
You're filling in the gaps, yeah, and there's lots of different ways that the gaps can be filled in. Or if you want to squash it, you can sort of throw bits away or play through them more quickly and stuff like that. So, creative flex time, I guess we would call this, which does incorporate this idea of granular synthesis.
Okay.
And then we'll see how we get on, but I'd like to maybe look at a little bit of Vari-speed and the different flex modes, and we might even get round to looking at Kontakt, just dipping our toe in the water there if we have enough time.
Let's do that.
Okay, so as I said, flex time is really intended as time stretch function, and really time stretch is usually used as a corrective tool. So we've got something that's a little bit out of time, we want to put it in time, or we've got something which is 100 BPM, we want it to be 125, so that's what flex time is designed for originally, and it helps, obviously, if you understand the basic way that flex time works before you start kind of pushing it to the limit and seeing what it can really do. So we'll very quickly flex a 2-bar break, which I've got here, and then we'll start pulling it apart a little bit. Okay. So what we have is a 2-bar piece of audio which I've already trimmed, and it's quite important for flex time to work. Your audio does need to be trimmed really tidily. So if we have a look at the waveform here and have a quick listen, it's a nice slow break, 2 bars with a kind of big tom fill at the end, which is great because we've got a few different tones to work with. So we've got kicks, snares, hi-hats, 3 or 4 toms, and we've got a nice big crash at the beginning. Okay, and that nice big kind of double snares thing here. But as you can see at the moment on the screen, it's completely out of time. The first thing to do is to find out what the tempo of this is and make Logic work around that tempo. So let's say that we opened a default project and the default project was 120 BPM. This is a very slow piece of audio, so obviously what we're going to need to do is slow it down to, I don't know, maybe roughly 80, probably even lower than 80. Yeah, quite a bit lower than 80. So we keep going down until we see this loosely fit around 2 bars. But there's a nice easy way to make it fit exactly in 2 bars, assuming that the audio is cut nice and neat and it is. I mean, if we loop it in the sampler, we'll hear it loop round and it should feel kind of natural. Okay, so that loops, but we want to know exactly what the tempo is. So what I'm going to do is select that piece of audio and tell Logic that we're working in 2 bars by setting these locators here. And I'm going to go into Edit and say Tempo, adjust tempo using region, length and locators. So this is the region, it's cut to the right length, these are the locators, and we're going to be adjusting the tempo of Logic kind of globally. So let's do that again. Adjust tempo using region, length and locators. Globally, that means the whole project. So we were close because it still says 64, but actually if we want to know the exact tempo, if we click here and go on to custom, we'll see that it was 64 and a half. Okay,
one of my favourites.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a classic. So if we play this in our arrangement now, it should just sit nicely looping around at that speed. We don't want to work at that tempo as much as we like it. We'd like to speed it up a little bit and then slow it down a little bit and so on. So the first thing we need to do is flex this, and there's sort of easy ways of doing this. The easy way is to just assume or hope that Logic is going to find all the transients, and the transients are those quick peaks, the changes in amplitude in the signal. So wherever you have a drum hit, that's a quick sudden change in amplitude, that's called a transient. And what Logic is going to do is detect all of those transients for us and put a marker in place. If I click on this little icon here, then what it should do, if I select the right icon, is that you can see now it's put these little markers in place. There's a few that are missing because actually there are some really quite quiet hi-hats in this, like there. So I'm not going to worry about it too much now, but if I was making sure that this was perfect, I would go through and I would draw in wherever I thought that there was one of those hi-hats.
And that's the Apple key you hold down for that?
That was the command key and then the pencil. Okay, and I think we got them all now. And when you're trying to use flex time to get something perfectly in time, it's really important that you work in this way. Actually, what we're going to be doing is kind of ripping this apart, so it doesn't matter too much. But what that means now is that we have a marker for every transient, for every kick, snare, hat, and so on. If I go to this icon here and I turn the flex time option on and open my little box here, you can see our flex mode at the moment is off. I'm going to put that on to slicing, and when I do that we can see the little markers now appear inside of our arrangement. So what that means is nothing has changed at all, it just plays exactly as it was, but I could now quantize this audio, and what that means is all of these markers will snap to the grid. So here's an example of a transient which isn't on a grid position. So when I quantize the audio, all the markers switch or kind of move to those grid positions. This is time stretch, and this is granular synthesis that's happening when it does this. So let's just say we wanted to start to manipulate this now. I can do that. I can change the tempo. I could speed it up. Or I could slow it down. And let's just give ourselves the metronome. Okay. So obviously this is very, very slow tempo, but you can hear what's happening. It's pulling the audio apart. Yeah. So what we're interested in is using flex time as a sound design tool. So we're going to now start looking at some of the other modes. Slicing is great, but it's really designed just to make things fit in time. Yeah. The interesting stuff starts to happen if we look at monophonic, polyphonic, tempophone, speed. I'll show you each of these quickly. So speed, for instance, what this will do is kind of emulate an analog process where we slow something down. So as it becomes longer in duration, it becomes lower in pitch. So let's just lose the metronome for a minute. If I sped this up to 135, for instance, what we'll have is a really nice kind of pitched up break. That's sounds a little bit Mickey Mouse maybe, because it was a very slow break to start with, but let's say. So that's the way the speed mode works. But each of these work in different ways. Let's say I go to tempo phone, then you can see over here what we have is a parameter that says grain size. And what we can start to do now is play around with the way it's messing this audio about. So what I'm going to do is slow it down way past its original tempo. And we start to get some really nice kind of metallic, stretchy kind of effects. The slowest tempo that you can have in Logic is 5 BPM.
Okay.
So obviously we're not going to usually work at 5 BPM, but just so that we can hear the effect of the time stretch. So we start to get some quite interesting kind of textures.
Yeah.
And each one of these hits will have a different kind of sound, and you can hear the kind of the tail end of the cymbals kind of doing some nice kind of metallic clanging and so on. And these toms will be quite good as well. So what we'll be able to do is bounce this down as it sounds now, and then chop it up and start to put it in one of our projects, put it in a sampler, do a little bit of programming with it and so on. But before we do that, there's one or two things that we could try. So for instance, you can see here the grain size at the moment, 49 milliseconds. So about a 20th of a second. So what we're hearing is 20 little pieces of audio every second. If I change the grain size, if I make the grain size longer, then we get something a little bit different. But all that's happening is you hear that kind of stuttering in the sound, where that's what we're hearing, but we're hearing it so fast, the sound takes on a kind of pitch. As we change the grain size, different pitch. So we could find a pitch that we liked, bounce it down as we want it, and then chop it up. So let's say that we like this particular pitch. What I'm going to do is bounce this in place so that because if I speed the project tempo back up now, it's just going to be the normal piece of audio again. So we need to bounce it as it is.
Can you automate that grain size?
You can't, unfortunately. You could, once we start to work in Kontakt, which is a sampler which has some granular parameters, you can automate the grain size, but not here, unfortunately. Okay. What you could do, I mean, it's a bit fiddly, but if you did want it at different pitches, you could bounce it out a few different times. Yeah. And you need to spend a little bit of time sort of organising your audio or your sampler, but you could do it if you were patient, or you could work in Kontakt. So we want to bounce this as it is, so I'm going to say bounce in place, and I'm going to call this passport tempo phone. And what I'll have now is a piece of audio which all of that kind of texture is rendered into that file. So if I go back up to whatever tempo I wanted to work on, obviously it's a longer piece of audio now, so it's taking up more of the project at that tempo, but it's all there. If we look at some other modes, we'll hear something slightly different. So for instance, instead of tempo phone, let's go back down to 5. Instead of tempo phone, what I'm going to do is try Polyphonic. And this is actually, although this isn't strictly granular synthesis, this is kind of my favourite. Particularly when you've got a nice stereo break, you get these really strange kind of left-right things happening. And each one of these could be chopped as a separate sample, and then you program your own patterns with it. You get you make your own kits. Yeah. And what we can do basically is make a granular kit, and every piece of audio that you put in and do this with will give you some slightly different results. But this is the type of sound that you're, see that's really nice. You could chop that, put it in a sampler, spread it across a couple of octaves and start playing a little line with it or something. So we want to preserve this as it is. So I'm going to do another bounce, control click and say bounce in place, and this one is going to be Passport, that's the name of the break. So Passport Poly. So we got one of those as well. And I'm also just going to have a quick look at one other mode, which is monophonic. I should say Polyphonic works, it's a slightly different process. It's something called phase vocoding, which we're not going to get into the details of right now.
But more on the course.
Yeah. These are things that we would look at in much more detail if on the sound design course. You know, we'd really sort of make sure that we understood this process a little bit better and explore a few other kind of related things. But I'm just going to change this into monophonic. You get some quite strange things. Think about monophonic.
Sounds like an 80s solo.
Yeah, it does a little bit, or some kind of wounded animal sometimes, which can be a bit unhappy. But what you generally find is just a few little bits which you chop out, and they just become a little nice glitchy, nice little glitchy sound. Stuff like that. I mean,
it's amazing what you're getting out of one break.
Just one break,
which is quite dry and quite characterless really to begin with.
These toms could be quite interesting. And the thing is, once we render this down, so let's say control click, bounce in place, and we'll call that Passport Mono. We've got loads of audio there that we can now spend a little bit of time working with. We can trawl through these and just extract little bits. So for instance, in the case of that mono, we might just find that not that much of it interests us, but there might just be a few little bits. Like for instance, I really like that little glitch. I mean, that could just become part of a kit almost, you know, when you make your own kits and you've just got those little funny extra sounds. You know, that kind of thing. We could put that in a sampler, start to play around with it and get the filters going and so on. So that's quite nice, but yeah, we'll find lots of things inside here that could be interesting to work with. But yeah, mono is the one which is a bit more hit and miss. You'll get some interesting stuff and some stuff which might be, you know, a little bit more difficult to find a use for, whereas something like polyphonic, you do get this kind of thing, which are just kind of really interesting effects, which it's kind of like you're printing your effects into the audio, if you know what I mean. So that is some of the things that you can do with flex time. And then obviously we would like to maybe chop this up before putting it in a sampler. So there's a few different ways of doing that. I could, in this case, use that transient editing mode that we were looking at. So I could go inside here, turn the transient markers on like this. Maybe we've got a few too many here, so I'm just going to lose a few. We can get Logic to chop this up for us at all of those points. If we come out of here, control click, and what is not here is a key command slice at transient markers. It's one of these little hidden things inside Logic. So if we want to find that, we'll go into our key commands by pressing Alt-K. We type in slice. We've got this slice at transient markers. You see it's not been assigned. So let's learn that. Let's find a key command which isn't already in use. Let's try this. Show hide staff style window. I'm going to overwrite that because I'm not sure what it is. So these three keys now are going to slice that audio for me. So if I just select the audio, it's chopped up. And those are only at the moment regions, part of a bigger audio file. If I want to convert them to samples, select them, convert to new audio files, let's make a little folder and call it Poly. And there you go, there's 20 granular samples that we've just made.
Amazing.
Each one can be put inside a sampler and tuned and filtered and reversed and manipulated in all kinds of ways. And they just might be the sort of thing that give your production that little kind of edgy, techie kind of character.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, that's one use for flex time, a kind of creative use that we could incorporate into what we do.
Yeah, I guess it's nice as well because a lot of the time if you're a bit stuck in the middle of, you're stuck in a loop and you're making a track, it's nice to just get away and just do sound design for a while. It's not in the context of composition.
Absolutely.
It's just creating samples for yourself that you can come back to very quickly later.
I think it's quite a good idea to have just sort of sessions where you just build up a little library of stuff, because some days the ideas, the kind of musical ideas, are just flowing more easily than others. On days where they are flowing, it's nice to have that bank of sounds already made. You can just audition stuff and go, yeah, that works, throw it in there.
Yeah, and it's yours as well.
It's yours, exactly. It's, you know, you've made it, it's unique. Other days the ideas, they're not really flowing, so what you do is you just think, all right, I'll spend 3 or 4 hours just making some stuff, add it to my library. Maybe in the process of doing that, something, a little light comes on, you go, ooh, I could do something with that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know. Cool, so we take a look at Kontakt, is that what we're going to look at now?
We could have a look at Kontakt. One thing that I would also possibly like to do though, a kind of related thing, because it's another sort of hidden feature of it's related, is the Vari-speed in terms of printing, slightly changing the character of audio and then rendering it down with this new sound. Let's say we go to, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just find a new piece of audio to work with. So let's find something which we know is already a kind of specific tempo. Let's find okay, so that'll do. Let's just add that in. This is a folder full of pre-made breaks. They're all 135 BPM. So this could be audio from a sample library that you've used, or you could just have sessions where you just make breaks, put them together, which is what I've done here. So if we take this and the first thing that we want to do is put our tempo to 135, which is the tempo of that break, I happen to know. So if we listen to this now, we should hear that looping nicely. Let's mute all of those. Okay, so something like this. Again, what I'm going to do is just get the flex time going, flex mode, slicing. That's done. Because this is a piece of audio with really nicely defined transients, I don't need to get inside there and start moving things around, it's just done. So I can play this at any tempo. Stuff like this, actually, these kind of programmed patterns. Again, we could go down that route, but that's something that we've done. So let's just say we go back up to 135. And this is something that we're working with, and we're just looking for ways to manipulate the sound, get a little bit more out of it. We've got a hidden feature in here, which is Vari-speed. And if I go to, firstly, you won't see it if you're in the default transport view, which is this. So we want to find Vari-speed. We're not going to find it there. We're going to firstly go to custom, like that. And then I'm going to control click in the transport bar up here and say customize control bar, and Vari-speed pops up there. If I say OK, I've now got this field here. So we've got a few different Vari-speed modes. What I want to do is change the pitch and change the speed. So I'm going to select Vari-speed, speed and pitch. And what this means now is I can kind of, if I wanted to, let's say that you're playing the guitar and you're trying to play a really tricky part and you just can't get it right. What you can do is slow the track down, play it, then speed it back. So that, you know, they're the sort of typical uses for vari-speed. But let's say if we slow the tempo down, so let's go to 67.5, which is half of 135. So all we're hearing at the moment is the brake playing at half speed. But if I take the vari-speed, let's put that up to 100. So I've halved the tempo, but I've now sped it up. I've doubled the speed. We'll be back at 135. But we've got this kind of funny pitched up character. So
like UK garage style.
Yeah. And you get these really nice kind of crisp drum sounds that you can, they're great for writing with and arranging with, because let's say you want intro drums, or you want kind of little drop sections where the big drums kind of drop out, or you want that really thick layered drum sound. One of the ways that you can make the drums fit together, well, there's a couple, you can EQ them, so kind of make them fit in different ranges of the spectrum, or you can tune them so that they naturally do that anyway. And this is kind of what we're doing. We're tuning it, we're pitching it up, but we're preserving the timing. And you can get some really nice results like this. Let's say we'll just try one or two more. Let's just randomly choose a few of these. And if we listen to the original, okay, see, we're hearing it with the vari-speed there. Let's just, you'll see that when I drop it into this track, it automatically, because this is already a sliced track and we've already got the vari-speed and so on. If we listen to the original of that, you'll see that it doesn't have anything quite like that character. To hear the original, what I'll do is just take the vari-speed off. It's okay, but it's a bit heavy, it's a bit kind of on its heels kind of thing, so it's not something we want to use. But once we start manipulating the playback speed, that could become part of our drum track. The only problem with this is our track is very sped up 100%, and actually we really want to work at 135, so there's one other thing that I'll need to do to preserve this timing and preserve this sound, and that will be to bounce it. And slightly different to flex time, I can't do a bounce in place, so if I do this, as we did before, if I control click, bounce in place, when I go back to 135, the break will become half the speed. Half the length it is now. So instead of being a 4-bar break, it will become a 2-bar break, and it will be sped up again. So we don't want that. I'm going to go down here and say bounce, and it's called Black Pudding for some strange reason. So vari-speed. So I have that now. That's this. If I go back to 135, put my vari-speed on 0, I should be able to hear that with that character that we've just put in.
Cool.
And obviously what we could do now, leading into Kontakt, what we could do now is put that inside Kontakt, chop it up. We're not restricted then to using it as a loop. We can spread each of those hits out across different keys on the keyboard and chop it up and start to program our own patterns.
Yeah.
Should we have a look at Kontakt?
We should, yeah.
Should we could do that quickly?
Yeah, let's do it quickly. We do have some questions coming. We'll get to them in a second.
Let's say we wanted to try that. I mean, what I'd also like to do is just one tiny little bit of pure granular synthesis inside Kontakt, taking, like, say, just a kick drum, putting it in and turning it into a bass line. That can be quite good.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We'll see if we can squeeze both of those things in. So let's say we need to open Kontakt up first of all. So I need an instrument. I generally use Kontakt as a multi-timbral instrument. So I'm going to create one new multi-timbral instrument, 8 parts. That means it's going to have 8 different MIDI channels available. And here it is. And let's just quickly load that up. I would probably use a multi-output and so on. Right, nice and easy way to create Kontakt instruments from Logic if you have the right version of Logic, because there was a version of Logic 10 which didn't allow you to do this. You just take the audio, you've already got it in the audio bin, just drag it in and it creates the instrument for you. It's done. And if we open that up and go to the mapping editor, you can see it spanned that across the keyboard for us. That's the original pitch there. We want to chop this up. I'm just going to take that release off. We want to chop this up and take each of those hits and put it on different keys. So what I'm going to do is move that out of the way like this, so that we're creating space to put our new slices on. And I'm going to, so you can see that my first free key is C1. And if I go into the wave editor, I can do some interesting stuff. I can zoom in on this. I can do some interesting stuff with slicing. So again, we've got a grid, a bit like we saw with those transient markers. And I can, let's say, we do something like that. If I click once here, it will map all of those slices to individual keys. I can start to program my own pattern. So I've got that sound, but I didn't like the boom, tit, boom, straight pattern. So what I can do is start to, do something a little bit more broken, a little bit more chopped up. We'll do one other thing very quickly, whilst tying in with this granular thing. Yeah. Let's say I find a kick drum to work with. I've got some kind of standard sample packs here. So let's say we're looking for a kick drum. That's okay. That's quite nice. That's interesting. Right, we'll have that. So let's add that in to our project and then create a new instrument out of that, like this. So we've got this beefy kick instrument, and I'm just going to turn on my keyboard so that I can trigger this sample. Right, what we hear at the moment is in this standard sampler mode. If I select the right MIDI channel, beg your pardon. In this standard, so I select MIDI channel 2 because this instrument is on MIDI channel 2. And it's a sampler. What that means is if I play the sample back lower down the keyboard, it plays back lower in pitch, longer duration. So that's standard sampler behavior. But what we can do inside Kontakt is a bit of granular stuff, bringing it back full circle. So we go into the source module and we change DFD, which stands for direct from disk. We're going to change that for one of these modes here. We're interested in tone machine or any of the time machines because they are all different time stretch algorithms which implement granular synthesis in different ways. If I go tone machine, what happens now is the sampler preserves the length of that kick drum at whatever pitch I play it. So it doesn't matter how high in pitch or how low in pitch, it will be the same length. This is interesting for us. If I take this kick drum and adjust the speed of playback, let's go down an octave or two, and let's take the speed down even lower. You start to get some quite nice bassy textures. Yeah. Especially if I take the speed all the way down to 0, some quite nice kind of stuff you can get here. thing about granular synthesis is it's taking the sample, dividing it up into these grains that we were talking about. In this situation with the speed on 0, it's actually only playing a few grains and it's just looping round the first few grains, like very, very tiny little beginning of the sample. But what it's also doing is cross-fading all of those grains to try and make the sound smooth. And that's why we've got this smoothing parameter here. If I take smoothing off, gets interesting.
All that from a kick as well.
This is just the kick
And as
drum.
we said earlier, you could automate those parameters too.
All of these are automatable,
Yeah.
but what is even more exciting is this. We've got a formant filter here. We can find a nice kind of starting point, and then the Kontakt filters are just great. We've got so many of them. We can start to work with.
Yeah, someone was asking about making dubstep in the chat earlier, but there you
Okay.
go. Straight up.
Yeah, I mean you could assign an LFO.
Yeah.
To your filter cutoff, make sure that the LFO was synchronized with the tempo of your project. So away you go.
Yeah. Awesome.
And yeah, so this is another, just dipping our toe into this granular.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic. Yeah.
It's a big topic.
Before we even break down the science of it, which we're not going to do today.
I mean, we only need to, we don't need to get too hung up on the science of it in order to be able to use the instruments and be creative with it. I think that's the main thing. It helps if you understand the principles a little bit, so then you know what these parameters mean. But really, we're more interested in using the synth rather than getting too stuck on the maths.
Qco is asking, can you do this on the free Kontakt player? Don't think so.
I can't confirm that completely. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that just reads.
Yeah, I don't think you can do any sort of modulation. I think with the player, you just take the library instruments.
Yeah.
And of which there's loads, really good stuff. But yeah, if you want to get inside Kontakt and start making your own stuff, that's where you need the full version, I think.
Yeah, totally. So we got some questions coming in. Do keep them coming. Where are we going to start here? There's a Russian name, which I'm going to try to pronounce that one. Apologies. Which VSTs do you suggest for granular synthesis? Absinthe was a classic, wasn't it?
Absinthe is good. Absinthe is really good. You can, let's have a quick look at that. If we wanted to do a little bit of granular stuff in Absinthe, we could...
I mean, all we've looked at today was manipulating samples with granular synthesis, but obviously there's a whole other world of generating sound using that.
Absinthe is really interesting because it gives you a few options. If you open up Absinthe and you go to the oscillators here, you can select these various different modes in which the oscillators work. And all of these are working with waveforms. You choose your waveform. Are you doing FM? Are you doing ring mod, etc. But if you look down here, we can use the oscillator basically as a sampler. So you change it from playing waveforms into playing back audio. And if you select granular, it's not like a full granular synth, but what it does enable you to do is to take audio, load it in here, and let's say we took something like a music box, for instance, and if I get my keyboard going again, what I can do with this now is if I go to this mod tab, I've got those parameters again for time and so on, so I can start to kind of freeze time. I mean, that's a completely dry sound. We haven't got any modulation, we haven't got any effects, so this is only a starting point. But in terms of coming up with some nice atmospheric textures.
Yeah, absolutely. Very absinthe-y, icy synths.
Yeah, yeah.
It's classic.
So that's quite, it's a bit of fun to be had there. Yeah.
And Blake Romex is asking, are those functions found in other granular synths or samplers, so the smoothing, speed and format? They might not be called that. I mean, here it's called time and size, grain size, so.
That you will usually find those parameters in maybe named slightly different things, as you say, but there is this basic principle of taking the audio, chopping it up, and then crossfading it. So smoothing, often that would be called crossfade or not crossfade. Right. Another parameter that you see a lot is something called jitter. So instead of having the audio play back at a perfectly consistent pitch, it manipulates the pitch very slightly, which gives you sounds which have a little bit more movement in them, and that's called various different things depending on what instrument you're using. But yeah, you come across these parameters again and again.
Yeah. I mean, let's see if we can find some more questions. Blake Romex again, he's very keen today. I read on some website that the individual grains are just 10 to 50 milliseconds long. Why aren't they shorter or longer?
I think 10 to 50 is about right, although you will sometimes work with longer grains as well. I think sometimes you'll go up to about 100. Remember when we were looking at the flex modes, when we were looking, let's see, we were working with tempo phone here, and you see that parameter there, the grain size.
To 49, yeah.
It can go up to 50, but 500, but that's half a second. So what you'll hear is so that's not really. So typically it's between 10 and 100. The reason why it doesn't usually go above 100 is because it will start to sound like like a stuttering thing rather than a blurred sound. And if you go shorter than 10 milliseconds, it just doesn't sound very nice.
Yeah.
It kind of goes.
That doesn't mean you can't do it.
You can do it, but you don't get much tone out of it. You just get like quite a shrill high pitch, which, if that's what you're looking for, great. But I think 10 to 100 is your usual range.
Yeah, cool. We got time for one more from Hyperproduction TV, who's a regular. Shout out to you. Question, what would be the best practice for saving all the kits and instruments to make sure you can use them on multiple systems? I guess basically creating your own instrument.
Yeah, that's a personal thing. I mean, it comes down to having a system and being organised.
If you're, just be organised.
Just like that. I mean, it's something that develops. Some people are naturally really organised, some aren't. I wasn't to start with. Actually, I'm still not. But what you can do is develop systems, and it's really good to start with that understanding that this will help you in the long run.
Yeah.
You organise your stuff, you build your kits, you build your instruments, you save them inside projects so that you will always find them in that project. But you think, well, I'm also going to make a copy of that in a kind of central user bank so that 2 years later you'll think, oh yeah, that kind of massive 808 distorted thing, there it is. You don't have to trawl back through old projects. So it's whatever system works for any person, but it's good to have one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good advice. So unfortunately, we are out of time for today's FFL. Hopefully you got plenty of inspiration for the weekend, but if you're thirsty for more, remember you can learn loads of sound design techniques on our diploma courses in London, LA and online. Head to pointblanklondon.com for more of that, and we'll be back next week for another FFL, so we'll see you then. Cheers.